A wild fox stood her ground. A broken man, still haunted by the past, stepped into her space without fear, and somewhere behind them. A young filmmaker who once caused harm now risked everything for a second chance. None of them spoke. Yet something divine passed between them. It wasn't just about rescue, it was about forgiveness. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The morning mist clung low over the Appalachian foothills, draping the ridgelines of western North Carolina in a curtain of pale silver. Rain had poured through the night, battering the canopy, and now the land whispered its aftermath. Leaves plastered to dirt paths, brooks swollen and murmuring, broken branches dangling like forgotten limbs. The usual bird song had yet to return, and in its place was the silence that comes only after nature has screamed. Sawyer Brooks stood on the porch of his cedar cabin near the edge of Blackthorn Ridge, staring out at the glistening forest. 50 acres of wilderness stretched beyond his home, and beyond that, the Sequoia Wildlife Preserve. He sipped his coffee from a clay mug worn smooth by years of use, his sun-darkened face unshaven, eyes narrowed under a brimmed canvas hat, tall and weathered like an old pine. Sawyer was 46, lean in the way men who work alone tend to be, with arms strong from hauling wood and lifting more than his share of the world's burdens. Once a ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, he had stepped away from the uniform 3 years ago after the death of his younger brother. Mason, a fellow ranger who'd been caught in a wildfire out west. Since then, Sawyer had kept his distance from crowds, from duty, and from anything that asked too much of his spirit. His peace was interrupted by a crackle of static. The old CB radio on the windowsill chirped alive with a voice from the past. "Brooks, you awake?" came the voice of Leah Harmon, a former colleague and one of the few people Sawyer still answered. Leah was in her late 30s, short, sharp-witted, and dependable as a trail compass. She was one of the senior rangers now, overseeing this quadrant of the preserve. Sawyer thumbed the receiver. "Been up since 5. What's going on? You ever heard a fox scream after a storm? I've heard a lot of things scream after storms. Well, this one's not stopping. South end of Hemlock Pass. Locals say they've heard it for an hour now. Sharp, desperate, repeating. Could be hurt. I'd check myself, but we've got flooding up near Cotton Ridge and I'm stuck. Think you could take a look." Sawyer set down his mug and sighed, his silence enough of an answer. "I'll owe you," Leah added. "You already do." He muttered and clicked off the radio. It didn't take long for Sawyer to prepare. He loaded a small med kit, a thermos of black coffee, a foldable saw, and a canvas tarp into the back of his faded green Toyota Tacoma. The truck grumbled to life, and soon he was bouncing along muddy tracks, wheels spitting up wet earth. The forest pressed in around him, branches hanging low with the weight of water, trunks slick and shining. The sky was still gray, thick with cloud, but the worst had passed. Hemlock Pass was quieter than usual. No wind, no rustle, just the squish of boots on wet moss and a single, far-off echo. He stopped walking when he heard it, a high-pitched cry, not of pain but of persistence. It came from down a slope near a cluster of felled trees, victims of the storm's wrath. Crows circled overhead but didn't land. Sawyer moved cautiously, hand resting on the strap of his backpack. Then he saw them. A cluster of red foxes, 5 in total, stood in a semicircle around something pinned beneath a splintered trunk. Their coats were matted from the rain, and mud clung to their undersides, but they were utterly still. Not a muscle twitched, Their golden eyes tracked him as he approached, but they made no move to flee. That alone stopped him cold. Foxes were notoriously wary, skittish to the point of vanishing at the snap of a twig, but these stood their ground. Sawyer crouched slowly, keeping his body low, his breath calm, and that's when he saw the sixth one, a young fox, barely more than a kit, no more than a year old, trapped beneath the limb of a fallen pine. Its fur was a pale auburn, darkened now with wet soil. One hind leg was twisted unnaturally, pinned beneath the trunk. Its chest rose and fell shallowly, and its mouth opened now and again in those same sharp cries. He didn't move closer yet. He studied the adults. One stood closer than the rest, a vixen, lean and alert, her ears perked and tail thick. Her right eye bore a small notch, perhaps from an old fight or an accident, but she held herself like a sentinel. Dawn. He would call her. Though he did not know her name, she did not bare her teeth, nor did she bolt, but she watched. Sawyer spoke in a low voice. Not for the foxes, but for himself. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you, just looking. Still." They didn't move. It was as though they understood, or, perhaps, more profoundly, they waited. He slid off his pack and pulled out a flashlight. The underbrush was dense with broken limbs, but there was enough space to edge in from the side. The log wasn't massive, but it would take effort to shift. The young fox whimpered once. Weaker now. Sawyer whispered again, "Hold on, little guy." And then he reached for his gloves. The air was thick with the scent of crushed pine and soaked bark as Sawyer knelt just outside the silent semicircle of foxes. Mist clung low to the forest floor, curling around their legs like something alive, and the trees, still weeping from the night's storm, loomed above like ancient witnesses. Dawn, the vixen with the notched eye, remained fixed in place, her posture tense but controlled. Her companions, a larger male with dark russet fur and a slightly younger female with a narrow face and pale tail, stood like statues on either side of her, their gaze following Sawyer's every movement. And at their feet, half buried in soaked needles and trapped beneath the branch, lay Ash. Sawyer eased forward, his boots sinking into the mulch. He didn't speak again. In moments like this, words were weight. He reached slowly into his pack, removing a small handsaw, its blade dull but reliable. With his left hand, he shifted the smaller twigs away from the Ash's fur, careful not to startle the fox kit further. The leg was clearly injured, bent unnaturally and swelling fast. The main branch would need to be shifted, not sawed, unless he wanted to provoke panic. Behind him, a quiet click pierced the air. Sawyer froze. It wasn't the click of an animal, nor the woods. It was the click of machinery, turning his head just slightly. He caught a figure partially obscured by underbrush 20 yards away, crouched, dressed in earth-toned waterproof gear, holding a camera with a long lens. "Friend or trouble?" Sawyer muttered under his breath, his voice like gravel. He didn't raise his tone, knowing sudden movements would undo everything. The figure stood slowly, both hands visible. Then a whisper came through the trees. Didn't mean to interrupt. "I didn't know there were people here." The man stepped forward cautiously. He was in his early 30s, with thick glasses fogged by humidity, a light stubble over a square jaw, and a backpack nearly as large as his torso. His coat bore the faded patch of the Carolina Wildlife Film Fund. "I'm Finch," he added. "Documentary work. Storm aftermath project. Thought I saw something rare. I was right." Sawyer exhaled. then turned back to Ash. "You filming this," Finch gave a hesitant nod. "I had to. I've never seen anything like it. A family of foxes, not bolting, not panicking." "It's quiet," Sawyer interrupted, not harsh, but firm. Finch shut his mouth and lowered the camera slightly, watching as Sawyer reached for a thick branch wedged under the fallen pine. He slid a short metal lever from his bag, a pry bar, and angled it carefully beneath the trunk. His every motion was deliberate, every breath shallow. He felt the pressure of eyes, not just from the foxes, but from Finch, too, as if the forest itself had become a theater of stillness. The wood creaked. Ash whimpered softly. Dawn stepped forward. It was barely half a stride, but it was enough to stiffen the air. Finch instinctively raised the camera again, but Sawyer lifted a hand, not toward the vixen, but toward Finch, palm open in a silent command. "Wait." The two adult foxes flanked Dawn, ears twitching but bodies rigid, and yet not a sound, not a growl, not a bark, not the telltale hackles raised in threat. Sawyer murmured, "I'm just moving the weight, that's all." The branch shifted again. This time, a faint snap echoed, a root or smaller limb beneath gave way. Ash's hind leg pulled inward reflexively, and the young fox gave a sharp, trembling whimper. Dawn's ear flicked, her eyes narrowing. Then she sat down. Finch whispered, "Is she letting you do this?" Sawyer didn't answer. He didn't need to. With one final shove, the branch rolled slightly, and Ash's leg slipped free. The injury was clear now, possibly a fracture, maybe worse. But not fatal. Not yet. Sawyer reached for a strip of cloth from his kit and gently patted it around the leg, stabilizing it with a tongue depressor and surgical tape. The small fox breathed rapidly, but no longer cried. Dawn crept closer, 3 paces now. Her paws made no sound, even in the wet. She lowered her nose toward Ash's face and touched him once, not aggressively, almost with relief. Sawyer withdrew a little. Giving space, the gesture was received. Finch stepped forward. "I can help get him to a rescue center," he offered. "I've got transport, safe box. I've worked with local rehab staff. He's not going to make it if he stays out here with that leg." Sawyer glanced sideways. "And what you take your footage, drop a donation link, and walk away." Finch met his stare. "Not this time. This one matters. People need to see this. They need to believe that Wild Things know, that they trust." There was a long pause before Sawyer nodded. "We'll bring the truck close. No nets, no boxes until the last second. If she lets us." As if on cue. Dawn looked up. Her gaze flicked between the two men, then back to Ash. She stepped aside. The hush of the forest deepened around them, like breath being held by the trees themselves. Sawyer knelt beside Ash, hands still hovering near the fox's fragile frame. When it happened, something not out of instinct, but of choice. Dawn, the vixen who had held the line with silent resolve, stepped forward with careful grace. Her fur glistened with lingering rain, darkened at the legs and tail tip, and her notched eye seemed to weigh Sawyer not as threat, but as something more ancient. Possibility. She lowered her head, nose brushing Ash's mud-streaked brow. Her tongue darted out once, gently licking the young fox's face in a gesture unmistakably maternal. Then she lifted her gaze to Sawyer, blinked once, slow and unblinking, and stepped aside. Sawyer swallowed, unsure why his throat felt tight. He had spent years among animals, had seen elk fall to ice, bears mourn over drowned cubs, but never had he felt so directly granted permission. "Behind him," Finch said quietly. "She's letting you take him." Sawyer stood and adjusted the cloth brace around Ash's leg. "She's letting us." Finch nodded, then turned and began clearing a path back to his vehicle. Parked a half-mile off on a muddy trail outside Hemlock Pass. "I've got a kennel box in the back, padded inside. It's meant for fawns. But it'll work. Should keep him from jostling too much." Sawyer lifted Ash carefully in the folded canvas tarp. Cradling the young fox like something both sacred and breakable, the other adult foxes, Dawn's companions, stepped backward into the thicket, their bodies slipping between branches like breath. But they did not leave, not yet. Dawn remained. She followed at a short distance, watching every step as Sawyer and Finch made their way back up the trail. Mud sucked at their boots. Rain began to patter lightly again, soft and steady. The rhythm of the forest returned in droplets and rustling ferns. At the clearing, Finch's vehicle came into view, a gray Subaru Outback splashed with mud and pine needles. He opened the hatch and revealed a well-organized array of field equipment, tripods, battery packs, stacks of notebooks, and several waterproof cases. Tucked beside a thermal drone controller was the padded carrier. They placed Ash inside, wrapped still in Sawyer's tarp. The kit whimpered once, then fell still, exhausted. Just then, a voice called out from the trail behind them. Didn't know foxes came with camera crews now. They turned to see Joe Whitaker, a middle-aged wildlife medic from the Blue Ridge Rehabilitation Center. Joe was solidly built, about 5'7", with broad shoulders and gray-streaked dark brown hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She wore an olive-green jacket with the BRRC logo on the sleeve, a scarf twisted tightly at her throat, and a utility belt that held both syringes and a granola bar. Joe had a reputation in the region, practical, no nonsense, deeply respected by anyone who'd ever needed an animal patched up in the wild. She had driven up from the station after Finch radioed her an emergency request. Finch smiled sheepishly. "Guess I called in the big guns." "You're lucky I was nearby," she replied, kneeling by the carrier. Her hands moved with firm efficiency, checking Ash's vitals through the mesh without removing him. No sign of spinal trauma. "Pup's dehydrated, shocky. I can stabilize him en route. But he'll need a quiet crate and x-rays when we get back." Joe turned to Sawyer. "You were with him when he was trapped." Sawyer nodded, and the adults didn't interfere. They did something stranger. They stood watch. Joe raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. Instead, she glanced toward the tree line. Dawn was there, just barely visible, her silhouette framed by darkened oak trunks, her body still, her ears forward. Finch, watching from behind the camera again, murmured, "It's more than instinct. There's something else happening here." Sawyer didn't reply, but he felt it too, the weight of witnessing something beyond explanation. Joe closed the hatch gently. "We've got to move. Closest station's 20 minutes. I'll meet you both there." As the Subaru rolled forward, Sawyer glanced into the side mirror. Dawn had stepped into the clearing. She watched the car until it disappeared beyond the bend. Then, slowly, she turned and vanished into the underbrush. They didn't speak much during the drive. Finch rode passenger seat in Sawyer's truck, watching the rain streak across the windshield, somewhere between the creak of wipers and the soft rattle of gravel under the tires. Finch asked the question they'd both been circling. "You think they'll come back? They didn't run before," Sawyer said. "Something tells me they're not done yet." The Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sat nestled between two low ridges outside the town of Boone, North Carolina. It wasn't large, just a main lodge, 2 treatment rooms, and a series of outdoor enclosures backed up to forest, but it was enough. Enough to save lives that couldn't speak. Enough to matter when the world forgot what wilderness meant. Ash was placed in a quiet recovery crate inside the intensive care room. The space was warm, the lights dim, and a soft layer of shredded pine bedding cushioned his still-braced leg. Jo Whitaker worked in silence, her gloved hands moving with the calm of someone who had tended every creature from broken-winged hawks to orphaned fawns. The young fox was sedated, breath-light but steady. A thin IV ran beneath his fur. She watched his monitors like a mother watches a sleeping child. Finch stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, camera bag slung over his shoulder. He hadn't filmed inside. Not this time. Jo glanced up. He's stable. That leg's cracked along the lower tibia. We'll keep it wrapped. No surgery unless infection sets in. He'll need 3 weeks, maybe 4, before he's strong enough for release. Finch nodded. You think he'll run again? Jo gave a rare, slight smile. He'll do more than run. Outside, the mountain sky was pale and cloudless for the first time in days. A fragile sunlight filtered through wet leaves and cast shifting gold across the lawn. It was there, under that sky, that Finch sat on a wooden bench and opened his laptop. He hadn't planned to upload anything, not at first, but the footage, raw, uncut, had played again and again in his mind. Dawn licking her kit. The silent wall of foxes parting as Sawyer carried Ash through the ferns, and the quiet tension that seemed more sacred than primal. It was truth, unscripted, something pure. He titled the video "The Foxes Who Waited" and uploaded a 2-minute sequence. No voiceover, no dramatic music, just the sound of birds returning and leaves shifting and Sawyer's boots in the mud. He clicked publish. By dusk, the video had 400 views. By midnight, it passed 20,000. By the next morning, it was on national news. Sawyer learned of it the way he learned most things, reluctantly, and by accident. He had returned to his cabin that day to rest, planning to chop firewood and call Leah with an update, but his phone rarely used, nearly always on silent, buzzed with a flurry of messages. The first was from Karen Bell, the head librarian at Boone Public Library and an old friend of his late brother. Karen was short, always in oversized cardigans, and perpetually smelled like cinnamon. She texted, Sawyer, are you seriously the guy holding the fox in this viral thing? You're on the front page of Reddit, Call Me. Next came a voicemail from Leah. Don't shoot the messenger, but CNN just emailed our office looking for comment. Something about a fox rescue in Hemlock Pass. I figured you'd want to know before the helicopters show up. Sawyer blinked. He hadn't even known Finch had uploaded the footage. And part of him, most of him, bristled at the exposure. He wasn't built for cameras. He didn't do awareness, he just helped a fox, that was it. He called Finch. The younger man answered on the first ring. Sawyer, I was going to tell you. I swear, I wasn't trying to turn this into a media thing. You didn't ask. I didn't think it would take off like this. Finch said, no music, no title cards, just what happened. Sawyer was silent for a beat, then, finally, you did it right, don't mess it up now. Finch sighed, I won't. The call ended, but the world didn't, by that evening. The clip had over 3 million views. Comments poured in by the second, some awe-filled, some disbelieving. Many wondering aloud how wild animals could show such patience, such unity for one of their own, and somewhere in that storm of attention, a quiet truth resurfaced 3 years ago. Finch had been part of a project in Montana, tracking bobcats through protected forest. He'd led a drone team too close to a den without realizing. Spooking the mother, the footage was incredible. but the kits vanished the next day. The backlash had been swift and brutal. Wildlife ethics boards condemned the methods, and Finch nearly lost his license. He never forgave himself. Sawyer didn't know all the details, but Joe did, one evening. As she changed Ash's bandages under dim overhead lights, she looked at Finch and said, "You needed to earn this one." He didn't argue. Meanwhile, back at Hemlock Pass, something unusual was unfolding. Sawyer returned twice that week, once to check on signs of movement, another to leave fresh food and observe. He found the same muddy track circling the area, feathers of fur along the edges of trails, Dawn's footprint, easily recognized by the slight stagger in her front paw. And on the third day, just before dawn, he caught sight of them, 4 foxes, standing near the clearing, not moving, just waiting. The morning light came soft through the dogwoods, casting pale gold across the Blue Ridge foothills. Spring had come early that year, brushing the hillsides with a tender green and dotting the underbrush with violets and buttercups. It had been 23 days since Ash had first been brought in. His limp was nearly gone now, just a faint hitch in his step when he turned too quickly. The scar along his hind leg had faded into a pale line beneath the fur, and his spirit, dormant for so long, had returned in full. The staff at the Wildlife Center had grown attached to him. Even Joe, who treated wild creatures with professional detachment, had begun leaving scraps of boiled chicken by the corner of his crate, but she knew the rule better than anyone. Wild stays wild. And Ash was ready. Sawyer stood at the open rear gate of his truck as Joe gently transferred the fox into a padded crate. Now, lined with pine needles and a small cloth that smelled faintly of home, Sawyer was dressed in his usual earth-toned flannel. Sleeves rolled, face unreadable but for the tension in his jaw. Behind him, Finch adjusted a small GoPro on the back window, set to record, but muted. "This isn't for the internet," Finch said. "It's just for him, so I never forget." Joe raised an eyebrow. "You really changed your stripes. Filmmaker." Finch smiled, more like grew into them. The 3 stood in silence for a moment. Then Joe gently tapped the crate. "Get him home." The ride back to Hemlock Pass was long and winding, but the day was kind, no rain, no wind, just the hush of morning birds and the faint smell of damp earth. Finch rode passenger again, one hand cradling the camera, the other resting quietly on his lap. No one said much. There wasn't much to say. The trailhead had grown wild in the past weeks. Ferns had reclaimed the edges, and branches, once stripped bare by the storm, now bore tender buds. Sawyer parked the truck on the same ridge as before and cut the engine. "I'll carry him in," he said. Finch only nodded. They hiked in silence until the clearing opened before them, and there, just past the fallen pine that had once pinned the young fox, stood Dawn. Her fur was sleeker now, less matted than before. Her eyes alert behind her, half concealed in the underbrush, were the rest of the small family, the elder male, the pale-tailed female, and 2 younger foxes they hadn't seen before, likely yearlings that had returned in the weeks past. Dawn did not retreat. Sawyer set the crate down and opened the latch. For a moment, Ash remained still, nose twitching at the smell of the old forest. Then, with a sudden burst of motion, he bounded forward, half hopping, half running, straight toward her. Dawn took 3 steps, then closed the distance herself. She met him mid-clearing, nose to nose, and then, without hesitation, licked the top of his head. A deep, chuffing sound followed, a vocalization Finch had never heard from a fox before. The others emerged then, slowly, encircling Ash without crowding him, Tails waved low and broad. No growls, no yips, only recognition. Sawyer turned away and rubbed at his brow. Finch lowered the camera. "You okay, just dust," Sawyer muttered, voice thin. The family lingered together for nearly 10 minutes. Ash nudged each of them in turn, almost ritualistically. Then, like he'd never been gone, he rolled in the dirt and darted through the thickets, stopping only once to glance back at Sawyer, and then he vanished behind the roots of the old tree. Finch caught it all, but when they returned to the truck, he didn't upload it, not yet, that night. He trimmed the clip down to just the moment Ash ran back to Dawn. No commentary, no credits. He titled it simply, "Ash Comes Home." It reached 1 million views in under 6 hours, but that wasn't the ending. The next week, Sawyer returned to his cabin to find a package on his porch. Inside was a framed piece of wood, smooth and dark, engraved with delicate script, where the foxes waited. A man was trusted, no note, no sender. He hung it at the ranger outpost the next morning, above the old map of the valley. Some stories didn't need signatures. They just needed to be remembered. In a world that often rushes past the quiet moments, The Foxes Who Waited reminds us of something holy, something many have forgotten. That trust is not earned through noise, but through stillness, that love can exist between the wild and the human, and that, sometimes, even in the darkest places. God sends us reminders that we are not alone. Ash's return wasn't just a rescue, it was a quiet miracle, a sign that when we choose compassion over fear, patience over pride, something sacred moves through us. It may come in the form of a fox standing guard, or a man who listens more than he speaks, or a stranger who chooses to believe in healing instead of spectacle. Let this story remind you, the smallest creatures can carry the greatest truths, and when we open our hearts to nature, we just might hear the whisper of God's voice echoing in the leaves. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who still believes in goodness. Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate love and redemption. And may God bless all of you who watched. Type Amen in the comments if you believe that even a fox's loyalty can be a message from above.